Hey, welcome back to the Usable Marketing Podcast. I am trying to get this one in before I have dinner. But here's what I want to talk about today. Stop justifying your product because reasons are not the reasons that they're buying. So what I want to talk to you about is the one thing that you can do that actually is going to get those buyers moving along. And what it really is it's stories. So here's the reality. For people who need to be convinced, if there's people that need to be convinced about your product, no amount of justifying the features, the benefits, all the stuff is actually going to do any good, right? Almost no amount of reason is going to be the reason that they're going to buy. What you need to do is you actually need to talk to their inner fear. And I'm going to tell you why. So here's the thing. When you're thinking about buying something, there's always like a little voice in your head that, even though you may not realize it, that's the little voice that is talking about all the little objections that you have. And those objections are actually around two things. Either they're objections around you thinking, I don't have the ability to do this. Like, I'm sure that thing is good, that product, that service, whatever it happens to be, that thing may be good, but what if I'm not good enough to use it? That's one type of inner fear that folks are talking about. The other type of fear is the fear that I'm going to do this and then someone else is actually going to be, or something else, someone else or something else is going to be the thing between me and my success, right? So you've got these inner objections and these outer objections, external objections that you have to get over. And so the single biggest, actually I'm going to give you three things, but the single biggest thing that encompasses all of them that you can do to get around these things is tell stories. And so, look, I got to figure out the right way. Number one is you need to tell a more believable story than they're telling in their heads, right? So this is what I mean. The thing that you need to do is give examples, build credibility by giving examples of success. Right. So if someone's going like, well, gosh, I'm just really, the thing sounds great, but I'm not sure if I can do it. And you haven't identified what their exact objection is yet. What you need to do is say, listen, this is my thing. This is what it does. But I'm not going to describe to you the features, the benefits, and all that other stuff. You're going to tell a story about another customer or a client that had an outcome because of what you did with them. I mean, I've talked about a bunch of different clients that we've worked with when we work with the marketing canvas, and I can try to explain the marketing canvas to you, and I can give you reasons that it works, and it does. But what would be better is if I just told you, listen, when we go and do these sprints with companies, there was one company that in the day that I spent with them, after that, within the week, they realized that their potential customer was worth over $1 million instead of the $200,000 that they were worth, right? So from $200,000 to $1 million and more is a big difference. We had another company that we went in and basically in one day revealed to them their actual value proposition that they hadn't themselves been able to get their arms around. The reason for that was they just didn't have the optics. Sometimes you need someone to come in. You usually know the answers. They're somewhere embedded. But what happens is when you try to speak reasonably about what your thing is, it doesn't resonate. And so sometimes when we go in and we work with companies, we're able to say, oh, this is what you're really delivering. This is the outcome you're delivering. They're like, oh, that's it. It gives them a lot of value, right? But for whatever your thing is, if you tell success stories, right, of what your product or your service, whatever it is, done, examples, real life people that have gotten benefit and kind of where they were before and where they were after they used your product or service, that's going to be a more believable story than the one they're telling in their head. Like, well, I don't know, I'm not very good. Okay, so the other thing is, so one thing is tell a more believable story than the fictional story they're telling in their head, right? Because the story they're listening to in their head is fictional. They're completely making it up. So when you tell a factual story about outcomes, you have way more credibility. Your story has way more credibility than theirs does, right? And when you replace their story with your story, then you start to get a believer. They're starting to believe like maybe this thing, this product, this service is going to be the thing that's going to make the difference in my success. The other thing that you can do, so the second thing I suggest you do is think in advance what their internal and external objections are. Your job really is not to sell the client or the customer on the features of your product, right? I've said this over and over again. Logic justifies, emotion sells, but you've got to do it in the other way around, right? You have to do emotion sells and logic justifies. If you capture them emotionally, and this is what you're going to do with stories, they've already convinced themselves. Now you need to use reason, right? Or the logic so that they can be like, oh yeah, that's right. Now I've got other reasons that I can tell people I can do this. And stories are the vehicle to do that. So go and find their internal and external objections. And what do those internal and external objections look like? They can look like anything. I hear people tell me all the time, since I'm a marketer, I'm not a very good marketer. And my answer to that is BS. It's like, no, that's a story you're telling yourself, right? And as long as you continue to tell yourself that story, you're gonna make it true. But instead, if they're telling themselves the story of, I'm not a very good marketer, I'm just not going to be very good with this. Even if I take your program, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Well, what I can do is actually say, well, let me tell you a story about someone who I worked with who they didn't think that they knew marketing, but we took them through all of the steps. And at the end, they were like, oh my God. In fact, I even have one client that I'm so proud of her, actually. She was telling me after she took the master class, how she was telling another friend of hers, like, no, you're doing it all wrong. You've got to do it this other way. So tell a story and then you'll make a believer. Those internal conflicts tend to look like things like, I'm not very good at this. I'm not good at follow through. I've tried it before and I didn't succeed, et cetera, et cetera. What you need to do is you need to go and grab those. You need to squash them one by one with a real and actual story from your kind of story repertoire. The other thing that you need to do is think of the external stories, right? External stories have mostly to do with things that are beyond their control, right? These might be, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. My boss won't let me. My wife doesn't like it, whatever those happen to be. And again, what you need to do is fill those things with stories, because if you can go and find a story to squash every single one of those objections, then what they're going to go is like, oh, that is possible. And they're going to be able to keep going. And then the final thing, really powerful, that you can do with stories to kind of get your buyers moving along, is you can future pace them. And what I'm talking about, I got it right there, future pace, right? So we talked about tell a more believable story, crush objections, and future pace. And what I mean by future pacing is whatever your product or service is going to be, you need to actually find out with your clients or your customers, depending on what you're doing, is like, ask them like, well, what would it look like if you did succeed, right? Would your life be easier? Would you have more time? Would you be able to take more vacations? Whatever those things happen to be for you. But you want to get them into the realm of what would my life look like if I actually succeeded with this product or the service, whether it's a golf club that's going to make you hit straighter, or it's a marketing program that's actually going to not be draining your expenses, but actually put more money in your bank account. You need to future pace them. Like, what would the outcome of that actually mean to you? Not like, well, then I would have more money. Okay, great. But then what would that mean? Oh, I could take better vacations. I could spend more time with my family, whatever that happens to be. So the three things that you can do, right, to move folks along, stop giving people reasons, because reasons are not going to sell them, but start giving them stories to move your customers along and actually get them to the purchase, is tell stories. And there's three things that you should do. One, first of all, tell a bigger story than the one they're speaking in their head. The one they're speaking in their head is fiction. The one you're going to tell them is fact, and yours is going to trump theirs, and you're going to be able to get them across the threshold. The other thing is, think of their objections in advance. Go and understand what their internal fears are, or what their internal objections are. Think of what the external factors are going to be that is going to come up with objections, and go and hit those proactively one by one. Your job is to crush objections before they actually come up, because the little voices talking in their head, they may not tell you that they're there, but they're there for sure. And then the last one is you need to future pace them. I mean, really make them think about, what would success look like? If you did this investment, but you got this return, is that worth it? Is that something you actually want? Do you want that sooner? Or do you want that later? You know, and get them thinking about those things. So here's my assignment for you, because it's gonna really change your outcome and whatever you're trying to do, whether it's personally or professionally. But my assignment for you is go and think of not the top 5 reasons for someone to buy your product, your thing, or your service, right? But think of the top 5 stories you can tell about people who have bought your product or your service and the success and the outcomes that they've had. If you've got those like stories in your pocket and you can just whip out those stories every time you're talking to a potential customer, I'm telling you, is going to make all the difference in the world. So build yourself a story inventory. Hey, do me a favor. If this was at all helpful, I want some feedback. If it wasn't helpful, tell me why. I really want to know that. If it was helpful, do me a favor, like share it with somebody, like it. I'm actually trying to grow this podcast and grow these lives. So I just appreciate your help. So that's what I have for you, and I will see you next time.